But look, I know it's important because I know these things cannot be forgotten about and swept under the carpet. But in terms of, we talk about the ICC, the International Criminal Court, there is no way on God's earth that Putin is going to allow himself to be hauled before the ICC.
No, that is absolutely true. And I think we have to be realistic, and it's very unlikely that any individuals who are Russian will leave Russia, which would allow them to be convicted before the International Criminal Court. But I think issuing warrants against individuals, identifying the commanders of units that have committed these horrendous events, killing civilians, torture, raping women, I think it's really important as a deterrent against perhaps future such behaviour, but also as a symbol that the international community rejects such barbarity.
Can I ask about, because obviously there's been questions raised, and it might not be the right time, maybe far from the right time, to sort of look at UN peacekeeping troops and what have you at the moment. But, of course, that would never happen while Russia has a veto.
Correct.
That needs to be looked at. Does the whole system of how the UN operates need to be looked at now?
The UN can be a very frustrating place to work. I was there for 5.5 years, sitting in the UN Security Council. And the reality is that when one of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, and of course Russia is one of those 5, as is Britain, if they are directly involved in a conflict, they can prevent any action being taken by the UN Security Council because they have the veto. Now, of course, the majority of the international community, including the British government, says we should reform this process, but it cannot be reformed under the UN Charter except with the agreement of all 5 permanent members.
That is stupid and ridiculous, isn't it?
It is ridiculous, but one has to go back to the origin of the United Nations for why that was done. It was a necessary compromise that all the top nations of the world would join the UN, which wasn't a given. Because if you remember, between the wars, the League of Nations was set up to try and stop future wars. But because none of the big powers at the time joined, the Second World War took place and no one could prevent it. So a compromise was made after the Second World War that in order for the big powers, the winners of the Second World War, to join this new body, they would be given the veto power. If that veto power was taken away, Russia would undoubtedly leave the United Nations, but so would the United States, probably. And then the whole thing would fall down.
Why?
Because the United States is very attached to the veto as well. They have vetoed many resolutions on Israel, for instance, in the Middle East. So Russia is not the only country that feels that it needs to have that veto to protect its national interests.